Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us to update us on what's going on in Israel this week. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on the current situation in Israel for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. I'm sure there will be quite a few, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. Obviously, this is going to be very different because, quite frankly, Israel is different. What happened on the 7th of October has changed Israel. We won't know exactly how much, but profoundly. I was just listening 2 minutes ago to someone who said their whole life they believed in peace, they believed in coexistence. That ended on that Saturday. The scenes, and I'm not going to go through it, some of the devastating scenes. I'm in various groups and speaking to various people, and I get sense that I'm sure most people, have seen some of this, but just it's not even the numbers, and the numbers we know. The numbers are that more Jews were murdered on one day than any other day since the end of the Holocaust. We know some of the gruesome stories, the 200 Israelis and other foreign nationals kidnapped. We know all that. What I'm going to try to do tonight, at least, is try and give a little bit of context, try and understand why this happened, what is happening, and what's going to happen next. I want to try and leave a lot of time for questions because I know people have information but maybe lack a bit of understanding to put it together and to try and tie all the different things that they're seeing together. So I'm going to try and get through what I have to say a little bit quicker and then leave time for questions. So the first question is, why now? It's clear that Hamas have been planning this with Iranian and other assistance, know-how, equipment for many months, some even say years. So why particularly now? I would suggest that the primary reason specifically now is because of the upcoming potential, well, now it's obviously put on the back burner, and we'll see what happens then, is the normalization with Saudi Arabia. Normalization with Saudi Arabia, as I've said many times in previous Israel Insider webinar, it is a game changer for the region. It dwarfs the Abraham Accords with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and others, because Saudi Arabia isn't just an other Arab country. It is the most important country in the Muslim world, certainly the most important country in the Arab world. And it really does signal in a large respect that the Israeli-Arab conflict would have been over. The fact that the country with the two holiest sites in Islam is now open to Israel and Israel is open to it is a game changer. And also, let's not forget, only a few weeks ago, President Biden stood in New Delhi, I think it was, in India, at the G20, talking about a new transportation corridor that would extend from India through the Middle East into Europe. And crucially, it would go through two countries, Saudi Arabia and Israel. So normalization wasn't just an interest for Israel and Saudi Arabia, it was an interest for the US, for India, for other players, certainly in Europe. But it would have also sidelined Iran in a massive way. And Iran, quite simply, and its proxies in the region, Hamas and Hezbollah, being just two of them, it really would have changed the region and really sidelined and isolated Iran in a way previously not seen. And Iran clearly did not want that to happen. So in the what was expected to be weeks, maybe a couple of months before normalization with Saudi Arabia, Iran decided to act. The question is, how did it happen? How did Israel let what happened that fateful day? There are a lot of questions. Primarily, they really go back to what's called the conception. The idea of the conception goes back to the 73 war, where Israeli generals, intelligence, security officials felt that the Arab world would not attack Israel in 73 because of the beating it got in 67, and they knew that they wouldn't be able to do it now. So They ignored a lot of intelligence, a lot of warnings, and Israel paid mightily for that. I think there were a couple of thousand Israelis killed in the first few days of the war. The conception here, which was proven completely wrong, is that Hamas, while a bloody and, according to their own charter, genocidal terrorist organization, at the end of the day was against the power and might of Hezbollah and its paymasters in Tehran. Hamas was seen as manageable. It was seen as a place where if Israel continued allowing more workers to come into Israel, improving the economy, allowing more and more development in infrastructure, then there was no interest for Hamas to launch any sort of attacks. In fact, Hamas officials have said that they lulled Israel into this view that they would give up jihad for the sake of a better life for its people. Clearly, that was not true. And Hamas have openly said for them, jihad and bloodshed and murder is more important to them than a better life for themselves and the people that they purportedly rule over. That's really the most important conception that was just thrown out of the water. Because of that, there were clearly a lack of troops, it being a Jewish holiday as well as the Sabbath. Some of the bases were down to a minimum. There was nothing really up until a couple of hours before that really set off any Israeli intelligence alarm bells. It now appears that there were, we did understand that they were training for this. We didn't at the time, I guess the intelligence officials didn't understand exactly what they were training for and kind of dismissed it as, okay, Hamas terrorist organization, they're training, but they're always training. And even when they started massing at the border, apparently the Shin Bet sent down a small team of 4 or 5 people because they thought maybe there's an attempt at a kidnapping one person, but nothing more than that. Clearly, our intelligence was off. Our intelligence was incorrect. Our assessment, just as importantly, was completely incorrect, and we underestimated Hamas. So the question then leads to what now? The question, everybody in Israel is waiting for this ground offensive to begin. There have been somewhere between 300 and 500,000 reservists called up. That's something like 125% of call up. There are people who didn't get call up and still have gone to units that they left or they retired from. So it shows a really strong feeling amongst Israelis that something has to be done, that this is a war that they have to win, a war that they have to defeat their enemies, because we cannot do this again in 6 months, in a year or 2 years. And the way Israeli leaders have been talking about is quite simply, I've never heard. Talking about victory, talking about vanquishing our enemies and the Israeli public, whether you are left, center, or right, because of what we saw, because of the fact that I don't think there's a single family in Israel that's not affected by someone who was murdered that day, someone who was kidnapped that day, someone who maybe just managed to get out, sometimes by nothing short of a miracle. The Israeli public is really motivated to ensure that Hamas are not able to do something like this again. But the question is, why is it taking so long? First of all, the uncharitable analysts are saying quite simply, we didn't have a plan for this, and they're hurriedly putting together a plan. The second reason, perhaps more charitably, is we're trying to gather as much intelligence. It seems that we are sending in special forces to kidnap some of the senior Hamas leaders to understand what is going to be expected when we do go into the Strip. Thirdly, perhaps one argument is that we've turned off the electricity, water, and other utilities. We're trying to smoke out some of the Hamas leaders who have built this underground network under Gaza. We know from previous rounds, as soon as they launch an attack against us, they all scurry underground and leave the civilians to bear the brunt. Well, we want to make sure, and already now we're starting to see some of the senior leaders pop their head up here and there, and we have been able to take some of them out. The more time, don't forget, underground bunkers need air systems, they need water, they need electricity, and without that, they can't stay underground for too long. But the most important reason is Hezbollah. Hezbollah are really a threat, the likes of which Hamas don't even come close. Hezbollah have an army and missile capability larger than most countries, if not almost all countries in Europe. That is a serious threat. Hamas's rockets are not necessarily accurate. Hezbollah have boasted, and we take them at their word, that they have missile capabilities that can reach almost every inch in Israel accurately. It's a whole nother ball game, and Israel really doesn't want to be fighting on two fronts. There's even a talk of three fronts, because Iran is trying to move some of its terrorist proxies in Iraq towards Syria, towards the border with Israel, and they're certainly trying to rile up the situation in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. So it is very possible, and it's certainly a nightmare scenario for Israel, that they could be fighting at some point over the next days or weeks on four fronts. Hezbollah, to our assessment, what I'm hearing, have not made the decision yet to go in. Let's not forget, Hezbollah's main role from its paymasters in Tehran is to act as a deterrent if Israel ever decides to attack its nuclear weapons capabilities. So the question is whether Israel is bogged down enough, whether Israel is weakened enough. If it is, then Hezbollah will come in. If it feels that it could lose that ability, because if Israel could fight back and really weaken Hezbollah, then that severely weakens Iran in the region. So there hasn't been a decision yet. There have been regular rocket attacks, regular shooting, regular sort of entry into Israel from Hezbollah, but it's more about testing the water and, more importantly, from their point of view, testing Israel's capabilities. So we're still waiting to see whether Hezbollah will make the decision, but probably they won't make a decision until Israel enters the Strip. Finally, we had President Biden visit recently. It was a strong show of solidarity, a strong show of support, because in addition to the fact that he became the first ever US president to visit Israel during a time of war, the US has sent two USS warships to the region, just to the Eastern Mediterranean. And that is also a strong message to Iran and Hezbollah to stay out of the war. It's clear the Americans are sending these messages to stay out, not just through diplomatic channels, but also through this show of force. And the fact is that the Americans didn't come empty-handed. They came to ensure that Israel had all it needs to complete the task of destroying Hamas. I mean, we'll see in the days and weeks, months, perhaps even longer, whether it's able to do that. But at the moment, we have extremely strong support from our American allies, from many European allies. So we'll have to wait and see. And with that, I'll take any questions on anything I've mentioned. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Wow. Carrie Hillebrand asked on your last note with the aircraft carriers, with two American aircraft carrier battles groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, can you envision a scenario where they would actively commit military assets?
Well, let's just say Israel has always prided itself on never asking any foreign entities to fight our battles. We don't ask a single citizen of another country to put down their life or try and fight our battles. Israel is always very proud of that, and we mention it frequently. So I think that would be a very last case scenario. I don't think that they would get involved in the fighting. There is talk, and there have been some White House officials who have claimed that possibly if they really feel that Hezbollah are coming in a really strong way, perhaps other Iranian proxies, then perhaps it would get involved in probably a more limited manner. I don't see the American army coming in full force like we saw in Iraq or other places. But certainly it's more of a deterrent at this point.
Thank you. Anthony Field asks, how does Israel win the war of minds when some of the media are so quick to spread the blood libel based on the say-so of Hamas without any evidence?
Yeah, I mean, it's utterly remarkable. You know, I'm working a little bit with the media, and, you know, Israelis said, you know, a couple of days after the massacre, they found babies with, beheaded babies. You know, I don't want to go into some of the pictures we've seen and some of the scenes, but still to this day, they want to see evidence. But when Hamas say 1 minute after a rocket attack that Israel dropped the missiles on it, on a hospital, and 500 people died, and even those numbers have been remarkably driven down, then the media accepts it. So it's very difficult. What I would say is that Israel is improving. In previous rounds, let's say, it took at least 2 or 3 days for Israel to get the truth out, and it was irrelevant. The story had gone by then. So the fact that we were able to show absolute, unequivocal, incontrovertible proof that the attack on the hospital came from an errant Islamic Jihad missile, and we showed it not just from our own sources, we showed it from Arab sources. We even delivered chatter amongst Hamas operatives that admitted that this is exactly what happened. So it's incontrovertible proof, which we've shared with our allies. And most importantly, we've also shared with the media. Now, again, many of the media say, well, Hamas said this and Israel said that. Well, Hamas is also an organization that claimed that no civilians were killed on October 7th. So it's not clear to me why they're an organization to be trusted. And I hope, and the message is trying to get out there, I hope that the international media will take everything that now comes out of Hamas, because everything comes out of Gaza Strip is from Hamas. They are the rulers there. They're the ones, when you hear these things, Palestinian Health Ministry, it's Hamas. And so I hope everything that comes out of there now is taken with a grain of salt. I'm not overly optimistic, but I hope at least some in the media today will do a little bit of soul searching.
I certainly hope so. Adam Perry asks, will the events on Saturday likely end any chances of normalization with the Saudis? And what has their response been over the last 10 days?
Well, I'll even take it broader. You know, especially last night with what happened with the hospital and the jumping to conclusions that it was Israel. We heard from across the Arab world condemnations of Israel, you know, some going further than others, claiming that it was intentional, whatever. We haven't heard any from the Arab world who now accepted that, you know, with all the proof that we've put out there, it's in the public domain, that it wasn't Israel. But what we are hearing behind the scenes is much weaker, let's say. The condemnations are strong, and obviously they have to take into account their populations. But the reason for Saudi Arabia coming closer to Israel, the reason for the normalization that was on the cusp of becoming reality, hopefully will still be true after the war. It depends how long it takes. Depends what the amount of casualties. It's certainly a setback, absolutely a setback. But it'll also depend. One thing is also important is that many of these countries came to the table, the Abraham Accords, the Negev Forum, etc., not because they suddenly became Zionists, but they understood Israel's place in the region. First of all, in its fight against Iran, but second of all, because Israel is strong. Israel has tremendous intelligence capabilities. Israel has tremendous military capabilities. Well, that took a knocking that Saturday severely. And that won't help our cause, because if you look throughout history, the Arab world, the Sunni, moderate, pragmatic Arab world, has sort of always sat on the fence and moved whoever is the strong horse, whether it's the First World War moving from the Ottomans to the Allies, and the Second World War from the Nazis to the Allies, in the Cold War, from the Soviets to the Americans. Whoever is the strong horse in the region, they will move to. And Israel, certainly that view that we are one of the strong horses in the region, took a bit of a blow, but hopefully we can regain that, hopefully through defeating Hamas and terrorist organizations, which none of them have any love for. We'll be able to regain that position in the Middle East and gain, once again, the trust of our allies and would-be allies.
Thank you. Larry Greenberg asks, is it true that despite Biden's presence in Israel, that Blinken has been strong-arming Israel by threatening to withhold replenishment of munitions, especially the bunker-busting bombs, unless Israel relaxes its forthcoming invasion of Gaza?
No, I haven't heard that. Yes, the Americans want to hear what is Israel's plan. They want, most importantly for the Americans, they want to know, if you do defeat Gaza, if you do vanquish them, Hamas, what is your plan for the day after? And Israel is very focused on its plans to vanquish, to defeat Hamas. and it's less focused on what happens the day after. But that is, something in which the Americans have very much been pressing. But as far as looking to withhold munitions or supplies or anything like that, at the moment, that's not the case.
Thank you. And in a wider scope, F. von Karp asks, there have been news reports, at least coincident in time, of both diplomatic pressure on Israel to moderate its military response in some way, and of course, perhaps a delay compared to expectations in a larger ground incursion into Gaza. Israel sounds determined to take necessary actions, but will it be able to do so as a diplomatic reality?
Well, I always say that during every previous operation, and again, this is quantifiably, quantitatively different, there is a diplomatic clock, and it starts ticking the moment Israel takes any action. And we have been taking action, even though we haven't sent in ground troops. We have been bombarding Hamas from the air, trying to really, smash as much as possible its intelligence and military capabilities. But the diplomatic clock has started ticking, and it always does tick. And I would say that if in previous, the clock was a little bit smaller, now it's significantly bigger because of the carnage and the pogrom that Hamas committed against Israel. It's certainly bigger, but it is still moving, and we've already seen some countries around the world calling for this, calling for that. So we'll expect that, and as soon as we go in, the casualties probably on both sides will start to increase. We see some playing this ridiculous game of numbers game. When more Palestinians are killed than Israelis, suddenly the war becomes immoral and it should stop, as if that is the key indicator. If so, then the Nazis would still be in power, because if you look at how many Germans were killed in the Second War as opposed to how many Americans or Brits, quite simply, if we go by that criteria, then should have stopped the war at 41 and the Nazis would have remained in power. I mean, that's quite simply a ridiculous measuring tool for the morality of a war. We quite simply, Israel needs to go in to defend itself, to ensure that this pogrom, that this massacre never happens again, and to make sure that all of our other enemies, whichever border they're in or further away, do not try anything like this again. It is a war, I wouldn't say necessarily of survival, although it could well turn into that if it becomes greater and there are more and more enemies. But certainly it is a war that will encourage our enemies if not done correctly, or maybe discourage if enacted in the correct manner, to ensure that Hamas really does not raise its head ever again.
Absolutely. So Carrie Hillebrand wants to switch gears here. Will effective pressure be put on Egypt to close off the weapons smuggling routes and tunnels into Gaza? If not, why not? Well,
Egypt doesn't really have any great love or any great ambitions to see Gaza militarized. So I'm not quite sure where that comes from. I'm sure there is some smuggling. There's always some smuggling, but whether it's done with the acquiescence of the Egyptian authorities, I doubt it in any great or effective particular way.
Thank you. And on the other side of things, there's been talk that Egypt isn't allowing Gazan refugees and the civilians to go through the gates. Is that still happening, or will there be pressure to allow them in?
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to understand when people talk about the Israeli blockade that there is one border that Israel does not control. Egypt is not opening that border. There is talk of maybe dual citizens being able to leave from there. And Israel said, after President Biden wanted some sort of humanitarian corridor, which Israel said we're prepared to give humanitarian aid, etc., when we get our kidnapped, abducted back, or at least allow the Red Cross in and at least a bit more information about their well-being. But until then, there will be no humanitarian corridor. But Israel has agreed to provide humanitarian aid in the Sinai. So that's obviously a delicate diplomatic balancing act if the Egyptians want to help, but they're also worried that they could be overrun by Gazans. And that's something which they've always fought against. So again, at the moment, they're not opening the doors. But they will probably have to make some gestures and probably at least let dual citizens leave through that route. Israel, as I said, really wants as much as possible to ensure that Gazans can get to Sinai, can get out of innocent Gazans can get out of the line of fire, because Israel has no interest in targeting civilians. So it wants to get them very much out of the line of fire, so it can really fight Hamas in a more equitable manner.
Thank you. And I know you're not a military expert here, but Daniel Volberg would like to know, what exactly is the general feeling? What is your assessment of the likelihood of action in Gaza being more of a precision strike rather than a large ground offensive?
It'll be a combination of, we're already trying to strike. We're trying to prepare the way for the ground forces. The fact that we caught up hundreds of thousands of people. Don't forget, the people who are now going to the front, they have lives. They have their doctors, their lawyers, their shopkeepers, their street sweepers, their everything in between. And it costs the Israeli economy billions to have them sitting and waiting. I wouldn't say sitting and waiting. They are training. And there are plans, and they are trying to enact them. So it's not something that Israel can have going on for too long. So there will be a ground invasion. There will be targeted assassinations of senior Hamas officials, which has already taken place, and taking out some of its intelligence and military capabilities. But there will be almost certainly a ground invasion at one point soon. Talking about a matter of days. As I said, Israel. There are a few reasons why Israel hasn't gone in yet. Some of them seem to be highly legitimate, but I would say the most important one really is just keeping an eye on what's going on in Hezbollah, because that is the scenario that Israel's most worried about. If it really does send in many troops into Gaza and it gets bogged down there, maybe that's the moment Hezbollah decides, now we've got an effective chance of causing a lot of bloodshed, mayhem, chaos on the northern border.
Absolutely. And that's Eric Selkov's question. Do you think Hezbollah is waiting for Israel to go into Gaza before they attack?
That is the assessment of many. They want to see if Israel does get bogged down, if it does get weakened, if it feels that it can deal Israel a really heavy blow, then it will act. If it believes not, and if it believes that Israel still has the capability to deal it a heavy blow, then that will be part of the assessment. Because, as I said, Hezbollah is completely funded, completely directed by Iran, by the Ayatollahs in Iran. They are oppressing the Lebanese people. They destroy their economy. They're destroying the country. They have zero accountability. They are there for one reason, and that is to serve their masters in Tehran. So if it's in Tehran's interest, if they believe that they can deal Israel a heavy blow at this point while remaining relatively intact, to fire another day, then they'll probably decide to enter. So we'll see day by day. Israel is sending messages. America is sending messages, because we would like very much to focus on Gaza and Hamas at this point.
Thank you. And I know sitting here in the U.S., it's easy to say, but Eugene Lecca asks, what would you recommend to diaspora communities nowadays besides rallies and Hezbollah activities? We're feeling a little useless over here.
Yeah, there's many different things. Maybe people can think about who they can target locally, which companies, organizations are invested not just in Iran, but also Qatar, which is a major funder of Hamas. That's on the sort of the larger level. I've said to people, and again, this is getting a little bit more personal, and this is pushing my sort of political stance aside. As a person living in Israel with family and friends around the world, the most important thing that you can do is just reach out to Israelis, because for the last couple of weeks, it's very difficult to be Israeli at this point, to see the scenes that we've seen, to prepare our kids, to watch over our kids, to run into the shelters. We just had to build, every Israeli house, but most Israeli houses have safe rooms. they were built ostensibly originally for Saddam Hussein's Scuds. Then they were kept for Hamas rockets, Hezbollah rockets, and we have to run into them several times a day. I'm in one now. You can't see because I have a background. But the most harrowing thing that I've had to do this week is I've had to get a piece of wood to go across the door of the handle to my safe room, because we're not talking about rockets, just rockets anymore. We know now people can come to our doors. They can open up our doors and do all sorts of things to our families. So now we have to think it's not just rockets that can come to our safe room. It's people, and people who want to do the most bestial things to us and our family. And that's what we have to think about. So anyone around the world, reach out to anyone you know in Israel. Tell them that you're thinking about them. People that you may have not spoken to for 10, 20, 30 years. Doesn't matter. At the moment, we feel isolated. We feel the world doesn't get it. We feel that people don't understand what we suffered. Everybody in Israel suffered, regardless of who they are, where they are. Everyone knows someone who was kidnapped, who was killed, who was there, who survived, who's now getting called up. This is all we're dealing with now, 24/7. So I would just say on a personal level, just reach out to people and just let them know you're thinking about them. And I think that really will make people's day. So I know we've moved a little bit away from the politics and the diplomacy and the security issues, but I think it's important to even think about these little gestures at this time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that ending message. So we've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you for taking time to update us this week.
Thank you.
For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Kenneth Levin discussing how the Oslo Syndrome led to the Gaza War. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe.